My name is Kenneth Weitzel. I am Tlingit Haida Dakuste Hushit from Hunakau, 11-year Navy veteran. Ooh. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a natural resource specialist with the Central Council. I was 11-year Navy veteran, and now I am a father of a wonderful 8-year-old little girl that was my summer intern. Today I would like to share with you some of Tlingit Haida's research that we are conducting in our ever-changing ani. The transboundary rivers and baseline water quality study is one of our most significant research projects. The significance of these rivers can be encapsulated in one word: salmon. Historically and today, Southeast Alaska's bloodlines are at salmon-bearing rivers. The Stikine, Taku, Alsek, Chilkat, and Unuk rivers are our major salmon-bearing transboundary rivers. In this GIS image, the red areas straddling both sides of the international border are those rivers' watersheds. Also indicated are some current, abandoned, and proposed mining activity within or near those watersheds. Why is this important? In 2014, a breach of the Mount Polley mine's 4 square kilometer sized tailings pond sent a torrent of mercury, selenium, arsenic, copper, and other pollutants into the watershed, which remain to this day. In early February of 2018, the Provisional Authority, BC Crown's Prosecution Service, dropped the case against Imperial Metals, the owners of the Mount Polley mine, stating a lack of evidence to proceed. Here is the tailings dam for the Red Chris mine within the Stikine River watershed. The wall of the Red Chris tailings dam is 105 meters tall, or about the height of a 35-story building. The Red Chris tailings pond is an unlined earthen centerline type tailings dam, the same design Imperial Metals used at the Mount Polley mine. For our sampling of each river, there are 2 sites where water samples are taken. These samples are taken on the surface at 5 feet and at 10 feet. The physical parameters are acquired with a YSI meter and a turbidity meter. The grab samples are then sent to a certified lab for further analysis. Here's a list of our field measurements made with the handheld meters. Many of these measurements are taken at the sampling spot used, while others, like the dissolved metals, have to be sent out and tested in the lab. We are near 30 sampling events on the Stikine River, and that was the first river we started sampling. With some of our food security marine programs we were working on with partners like the Sitka Tribe of Alaska and their Southeast Alaska Tribal Ocean Research Lab, or CTOR. Throughout our RNE, tribes are collecting shellfish samples of multiple species twice a month at multiple sites, and then package and ship the samples to CTOR for laboratory analysis. In Juneau, we are sampling at 2 sites, Point Louisa and Amalga Harbor. CTOR and the Sitka Tribe of Alaska Laboratory are now analyzing samples from tribes throughout the entire Gulf of Alaska. At CTOR, samples are analyzed and a report of the paralytic shellfish poison, or PSP levels, is disseminated. The turnaround for these reports is about a week. This summer, the entire Gulf was hot with PSP, the entire summer. And I can't remember that happening before. When harmful algal blooms are detected, regular bi-monthly water sampling is bumped up to twice a week, and microscopy is conducted with the results reported back to CTOR for dissemination on the PSP advisory websites. These websites are found at ctor.org or the State of Alaska's PSP resource page. And in the bottom corner, or in the bottom right there, is my summer intern on one of the trips she got to go with me this summer. Tribes in Seator are also conducting ocean acidification research. Current projections show an inevitable increase in acidification, which will harm many, if not all, marine natural resources. And with the University of Alaska, in their ocean nutrient analysis program, we're taking measurements of biomass concentrations, cell abundance, and trace gas analysis to be interpreted for future use. Twice a year, we have begun collecting shellfish biomass surveys. For our biomass survey, we measure and document all shellfish in multiple GPS-marked 1 by 1 foot size digging sites, then return the shellfish to the habitat. For example, here is the GPS to GIS map for the biosurvey we did at Amalga Harbor, which is just north of here. A biomass survey will document baseline shellfish populations over time. In our forests, Tlingit Haida has completed a forest inventory report and forest management plan for the roughly 18,500 acres of native allotments in the Sea Alaska unit of Southeast Alaska, for which we, Tlingit Haida, are entrusted with providing services. One of the findings of this report indicates yellow cedar decline is associated with freezing injury to fine roots, where snowpack in early spring is insufficient to protect roots from late season cold events. These are some of the impacts of a less snow, more rain climate regime. Southeast Alaska is a unique place, and we found out that we needed a unique climate change adaptation plan. In December 2015, Tlingit Haida held a climate change adaptation plan workshop in Tulalip, Washington, which was focused on tribal aspects, the similar ecology Southeast Alaska shares with the Pacific Northwest, and the lack of scientific data for Southeast Alaska. In 2016, 16 federally recognized tribes concurrently approved resolutions for the need of a climate change adaptation plan and template. Now, I'd kind of like you to pay attention to that. That was 16 tribes that were concurrently, they unified with a single voice, so it can be done. In May 2016, BIA funding was awarded for the creation of a full-time position tasked with the creation of a tribal climate change adaptation plan and template for Southeast Alaska. In March 2017, this position was filled and work began. With much appreciation to Jamestown Sklallam, we were given their climate vulnerability assessment and used their outline and format, researched and applied the available local data, which was sparse at the time. Added sections that include isostatic adjustment, also known as post-glacial rebound, and an explanation of the carbon atoms isotopes and the significance of delta C13, or the change in the carbon isotope ratios since the Industrial Revolution, which point directly at fossil fuels. With a lot of support and assistance from organizations like ITEP, Sea Grant, Alaska, and the University of Oregon, here are some of the highlighted sections of the Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska's Climate Change Adaptation Plan. Quickly, here are some of the chapter headings: temperature changes in the region with the data, that brief section about carbon and the changes in the ratios of the isotopes, which point directly at fossil fuels. Here is the less snow, more rain scenario, historical data and projections, which are the major damage to cedar. Isostatic adjustment due to massive losses of ice weight. Shore zone changes are increasing, and we will continue to outpace the rising sea levels here in Southeast Alaska. Ocean acidification, data and projections. data on our forests and cedar decline, which gets way more in depth with the forest management plan, and a few considerations on the human impacts of climate change. In December 2018, the first draft was completed. There are resilient strategies for salmon, shellfish, harmful algal blooms, cedar, forage fish, halibut, wild berries, invasive and recolonizing species, crab, seal, and seaweed. In early 2019, the Tlingit Haida Executive Council approved the plan and the template. In May of this year, a climate change adaptation plan template workshop was held in Sitka, hosted by the Sitka Tribe of Alaska and CTOR, that provided training on how the tribes, those 16 tribes, can implement the template into a plan of their own. In the future, we want to create a collaboration network and annual workshop that keeps each of our tribes' climate change adaptation plans active and as a living document. Speaking of the future, our elders were active with us. Let us be active with our future. That's my daughter. And that was on one of our shellfish biomass digs. These have been highlights from just a few of the projects that we at Tlingit Haida are conducting. Gunish Chishawa, and thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes?
I have trouble grasping ocean acidification. It's been explained to me a couple of times. Could you have a go and maybe I'll somehow be able to absorb it?
Ocean acidification, explained in a nutshell. The pH balances are changing because of the carbon that the oceans are absorbing. That pH balance change affects shellfish generation and all the shellfish. So they'll start having softer shells. They'll not be able to grow into fully mature adults. Those are the effects of it. It's just a chemistry change of the ocean that's happening more drastic and in a shorter time frame than it ever has. The ocean's always changed. The last time we had a massive pH imbalance, the ocean created 200 feet of calcium. That's the cliffs of Dover. That was a pH imbalanced ocean, and it was just millions of years of shellfish just dying and creating all that chalk. That's what a changing ocean can do.
Do you see signs of ocean acidification in our area?
Yes. It's everywhere. Everywhere the ocean touches, it's happening.
And can you explain how visible it has been to you, what you've observed here?
In just my 2 years of doing shellfish, I've noticed that the shells are getting softer. They're way more brittle, and it's probably only going to get worse. Yes?
In terms of the health of the ocean and food, we had Hecla Mine and Prince of Adam. I'm on the board of Prince of Adam. We've done quite a bit of sampling of fish and seal, clams, many species. And of course, the seal found in Hawken that was the most toxic, or the second most toxic seal ever found in all of Alaska in samples in our laboratories, and very high levels of all this stuff. Is there anything connected to this?
That is an internal Alaska mine, and all of our mines in Alaska are following all of the state's guidelines. Meanwhile, the environment is still suffering.
It's not obviously.
Obviously, those guidelines aren't enough. So one of our mitigation strategies on something like that would be to get a more active voice, to be at the table, not to just be a voice, but to get at the table.
I I spoke to the scientists who were sampling, and they said the pickled is sampling in the wrong places on purpose, because the mixing zones, and they take it where it's the least. And of course, they're heavy metals, which are low, but they take it, the sample's high, and they take it during when the water's, rushing in, so that it gets a very, very low, much lower state of, results. So there's a lot of internal kinds of stuff that's going on.
That's why every time you get a neutral sampling, somebody supposedly neutral, it's one of the highest contaminated specimens that's ever been recorded.
How many people are on your team that are actively doing testing?
For Shellfish, it's just our office. It's 3 of us. Sometimes we have youth engagement, and that's a real good way to use youth engagement, is to get help with the high school kids.
And then also, that's for all of Southeast Alaska and all those communities.
And each of those 16 tribes, they're taking it upon themselves to do each of these projects that we're doing. For example, in Wrangell, we would be hooking up with the Wrangell Cooperative Association, and they'd be going out with us to sample.
Do you see in the future that it's not just the 3 of you, but maybe actually people that are there full-time and possibly could be doing it just as much as 2 times a week, you said?
It all comes down to funding. It's always funding. And there's always more work than you're being funded for. On a little bit of a side note, the gaps that are increasing in the current administrative environment will just be filled by us. So it's okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was looking at the slide that you had for water quality testing, and I was wondering if you could bring it up again and show us all those different chemicals that are showing up in water quality.
They're not showing up. That's what we're testing for.
Well, that's what you're testing.
Yeah, boy. I want to be clear about that. That's not what's showing up. We're making sure those things aren't there.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right.
Sorry to scare you like that. There it is.
Yeah, you just passed it. That one.
These are what we're testing for, and these are the types of contaminants that would be leaking out of mines.
Well, the only reason I asked that, and again, I'm going to bring up a kind of a controversial topic, and I don't know how much you know about it, but there is a lot of geoengineering going on.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Pick a spot.
The chemicals that I'm seeing there are all the chemicals that they're dumping in our sky, which is ending up in our water.
Most definitely, yes.
So that's.
So what we're trying to do right now is say, we're just trying to create a snapshot of what the state is now.
Yeah.
We don't know if it's good or bad, and it doesn't matter. This is just going to be what the baseline is, and we hope it doesn't get any worse from here.
Yeah. Well, I know every time the city comes out with their water quality report, I read it, because I want to know what's showing up in our local water, because again, it's changing.
Yes, it is. Sir.
I get paid. The name of your presentation is?
I changed my presentation title on the fly, so I apologize for that.
Climate Change Adaptation Plan and adapting to a changing environment and allows people to survive. So if acidification has caused, say, Dungeness crab for shells to become weak, and they're predated upon a lot more, and the population goes down. And you can communicate that information to the commercial fishermen, who then have the option to change, to find other work, because the Dungeness crab industry is going to go away. As an example, and I'm thinking of all the clam commercial fishermen, and that may be true too. Is that what you're going for in the adapting part of what you're speaking of?
A majority of the mitigation parts right now are getting onto the management aspect of it at this point. There are mitigation plans in the plan for like shellfish, like getting approval for shellfish farming for seeding, and species migration. Oyster farming is starting to become more and more, you see it coming up each decade. It's getting higher and higher up the coast. Before you know it, there'll be oyster farming done here.
Good or bad?
If you're an oyster farmer, good.
Well, but
If you're
from
not,
an environmental standpoint.
we will find out
Oh.
when it gets here.
But you're coming up with a plan, you're coming up with advice for folks to adapt, to change. And having baseline of understanding that there aren't any of these heavy metals in the water right now. And one can say, when they do appear, what the culprit is, and maybe be able to stop them. And it's real understandable what you're doing.
Thank you. That's what we're hoping for.
Can I just follow up with one little question?
You don't get the microphone.
No, I'm loud enough that I don't need it. Do I get to continue?
Please, go ahead. We might be getting kicked out of here, but that's okay.
So I'm not clear about what you actually said about those metals. Are they universally not showing up? No, he gave me a...
Before any kind of determination can be made, 36 events need to be taken for a specific site. So it hasn't even been, we haven't even seen the data yet for the baseline.
Okay.
But as soon as we do, it's all of our data goes out. We keep it, but it goes out the window. We yell it out the window as soon as we get it.
Okay, I want to report some baseline that was done by the government prior to the Hecla mine being operated. You know that exists?
I'm sure it does. I hope it does, and I hope
It
it's
does.
accurate.
I mean, we have the data. I'm telling you it exists. You can contact the Friends of Admiralty, and they'll provide an entire, all of those, many of
Ooh,
those
and that's
that
gonna be-
exist. And a baseline, and then the differences of many of those, including lead and zinc and so on.
And that's going to be DEC?
No, it's the Friends of Admiralty,
Oh.
which is a nonprofit,
Okay. It's a
non-governmental
nonprofit.
organization.
Okay.
I can give you a phone number after this, and you can contact them.
Okay.
The president is Dan Monteith,
Okay.
who
Thank
you may know.
And I
uh,
hope I have a couple
Yeah,
cards here.
but I would definitely, since you're discussing these things, we do have those samplings.
I
and-
certainly will. Thank
And
you.
the baseline prior to them.
I have a question that relates to food and gardening. I understand from our elders that our ancestors had gardens. I know my mom worked in a garden at Okwan, and it seems that Forest Service archaeologists have confirmed that there have been gardens throughout Southeast Alaska that are pre-contact. And I think of food shortages, and I wonder what plans are afoot to promote a return to more gardening here in Southeast, so
That's
that
a
we
wonderful
might
question.
stem the food shortages.
There are new programs that are starting, and I'm not really well versed in it, but it has to deal with the high tunnels and making farms of high tunnels so we can keep the environment at optimum levels for vegetative growth, that type, and funding for projects like that, for starter projects. A lot of the tribes down south have just started entire farms on their own, and the community, that's bringing the communities together whenever they have the farmers market and everything. We will be starting. Right. And we want to keep our plan active. We want all the tribes to get together once a year to say, this is how we're updating the plan. These are the new things we found. These are the things that aren't working. That type of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good ashish. Oh, do you have another question, Alfie?
A comment and a question. So when you're talking about ocean acidification and pH balance, it reminds me of my little bitty tropical fish tank. When the water is not just so, the fish are not well, and they could even die. And I can control that. But it scares the heck out of me that we don't have any control about what's going into our oceans. The tourists come and they dump all their sewage in, and the mining companies are putting all this stuff in the water, and it's frightening that we can't just go fix it. And that's just a comment. And I'm really glad that you folks are doing this. You're taking some measurements to say, this is how it is. And I'm guessing the plan is you're going to keep doing it to monitor how it's changing.
As long as we can, we're going to keep doing it, and all of the new gaps that this administration creates, we'll fill.
And so my question is, who else gets to see this data? Do you folks send this to somewhere that matters, that's going to hear your voices, or do you have a seat at the table for this?
Those are all in flux. Those are all we haven't received. We haven't received the data enough to be able to disseminate it yet. On all of our projects, practically. But the one that we're closest to getting to that point is the transboundary rivers, because we've been doing that for 4 years now. Thank you, Alfie.
Who's your employer?
I work for Tlingit Haida, Native Lands and Resources. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a quick question. Will the folks up in Dillingham and Bristol Bay be able to use this information in their trying to block the mine that is proposed in that area?
They are free. They will be free to, most definitely.
But I mean, will you be more active than that? I mean, to be collaborating with them. They don't have the data probably to measure what any changes right now, because there isn't a mine there, and so I mean, they have the waters there that can be tested, but we don't want this to be wrecked.
Right. And
This
I
is
totally understand.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it comes down to project funding. The transboundary rivers, that's international, so our funding is federal.
Mm-hmm.
The Hecla, Pebble, all those other ones, those are interstate, or they're intrastate. They're in the state.
Yes.
And I don't think the state's that keen on funding private investigations into what they say is okay. And that's just an opinion of mine, but it's harder to get tribal research done on the interior than it is on the international borders.
Right, but Tlingit Haida and Bristol Bay Native Corporation could be in collaboration with each other, don't you think?
I will definitely reach out.
Okay,
most
thank you.
definitely. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brooke Leslie and I'm from Wrangell. When you
Hello.
started your presentation, you referred to the lawsuit that was filed after the breach of the dam. And you said that, the Mount Polley, and you said that it went nowhere because they had no baseline data to show significant change, essentially, correct?
What I got was a report from a Canadian newspaper saying that all of the charges for the state level for British Columbia have been dropped due to lack of evidence.
Yes. And so
And it's hard to tell. It's hard to believe that. I mean, just looking at that picture, how there can be a lack of evidence.
Right. I mean, I see that. I'm assuming that nobody did the water sampling and did testing and the research that is what my guess would be what Tlingit Haida's one of their strategic goals is within this project of these transboundary mining systems.
I believe the First Nations that are in that area do have their water sampling, and they have their baseline, and the baseline says, yeah, you destroyed our land.
Does it? So what is the, aside from taking these samplings and identifying what changes might be happening over time, I understand that you don't have the data yet and it's still in the observation phase, but could you restate what like the long-term strategic goal or plan is with this? Like how do you plan to utilize the data to implement change?
The transboundary rivers aspect is to keep it at a baseline and to use this data once we have it as a legal leverage to say we have documented proof that this is what the condition was prior. And that's mainly what the purpose of that is. Mm-hmm. And it's something...
In case something catastrophic in the future does happen, somebody will be accountable next time, right?
We'll have the evidence to hold somebody accountable, and we will hope that that will be the case, but at the very least we'll have the evidence. Thank you.
The second part of my question then is there any sort of, or is there any part of the strategic plan to be preventative of a catastrophic disaster happening?
No, and that's scary to just sit there and think that this giant avalanche, this giant tsunami is just sitting there.
Yeah.
That giant tsunami is just sitting there in the Stikine watershed.
Thank you.
Big chunk of dirt.
And that's exactly what it is.
Do you know what the history of these toxic waste dams on rivers in Southeast is in terms of failure? The percentage of them who fail?
I do not, especially off the top of my head.
But
all it took was one, and that's all it took to get it in the minds of everybody.
At this point, it's 100% of them that have been built have failed.
Holy, that I would be surprised. Well, I guess I was surprised, but
I mean, there's been a lot of failures, and those who happened, we're just waiting for them to fail, probably.
I am Yenye D, and our clan hails from Taku, and the Tulsequa is there, and it's still leaking into the Taku.
Oh, Tulsequa chief.
Yeah, and I recall going to meetings when they wanted to reactivate the Tulsequa, and they brought in their engineers, and they designed this really spiffy, they say, piece of machinery that was going to go from the dirt road into the river, and it was going to somehow retract its wheels, and it wasn't going to cause any damage to the riverbed. Well, all of us who were Tlingit at that meeting, we argued. They never moved forward with that. But I think it's very important, and I'm very glad to hear that the tribe is collecting this data, because we do know that governments are political, and that they sometimes get rid of their ologist. Mm-hmm. And I was on the Stikine talking to a fisheries biologist who worked for Fish and Wildlife, and he shared with me that all of his colleagues on the Canadian side had all lost their jobs. The Canadians in BC downsized their ologists so they could get ready for the mining. So thank you, Tlingit Haida, for having the wisdom to collect this data.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thank you all very much.